12-year-old me decided to pick up strength, training, climbing, and running. Here is how this decision turned out. Don't get me wrong, I was a pretty sporty kid already. In elementary school in summer we played soccer in the schoolyard pretty much every single break we got. And at home I also ran around all day. But this is what kids do, I guess. Running around, having fun, running around. Only years later I would realize that this also had its side effects, such as pain. I sat in front of this doctor at age 12 because for most of my early years I had alternating pains in my joints. Like the hip, for example, it often prevented me from sleeping. Whenever I did something active, after a while it disappeared, only to hit me up later again. Like an old friend, this doctor now sat in front of me after he examined the different joints, like the knee and the hips, and he didn't really have an answer for all of these questions. But he recommended, amongst other things, picking up a team sport. I began to search for one. For years I had wanted to play football, soccer, but due to family scheduling, this wasn't really possible, at least I thought so. I started climbing at a small local climbing wall. Every Friday we met and climbed together the same wall over and over again. Of course, there also were other climbing halls around, but usually you had to drive at least 30 to 40 kilometers to these. But then someone close to me started to pick up lifting. And in my family there had been runners before. I don't know how much I also realized I needed additional strength, especially in my arms, in order to climb better, but I already had a decision. Around age 12, I decided to run every single day and do something, and do some lifting. If you can call it lifting. We had a Kettler station, which is a multifunctional fitness machine. Here you can see a picture of the Kettler station if you're watching this or reading this on the blog. Probably you're not, because you are watching this. It doesn't really make sense to also mention it, I guess. Only problem, it didn't really work out for me. Of course I worked out, but machines like these aren't really made for the size of 12-year-olds, so I only could do very light weights and body weight. There is also the additional risk of influencing how the body is able to grow in these early years. Therefore, I used only 5 to 10 kilograms of weights for the Kettler Fitmaster. And additionally, I began to do push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. Strangely enough, or much more proudly enough, I also wasn't bad at all of these things. I can remember one instance in elementary school where our sports teacher asked, "Who wants to compete in doing the most push-ups?" And of course, how else could 7 to 9-year-old me respond but with "me"? Along with other daring participants, we did more and more. I actually cannot remember if I won. Only the image of us last three doing the daring number of 10 or even more push-ups in front of the entire class. Maybe this was the one final round. Or maybe we just did 10 push-ups. What I'm saying here is this: I already had a glorious history as a bodybuilding champion way before I started training and running. Seriously. Here is the picture, the final picture of me after winning my first bodybuilding competition at the beach. So here's a 3-year-old me at the beach. Hate to say, he knew how to pose before Instagram was invented. Because everything just... Oh yeah, I forgot a paragraph. But a few weeks after I started my training regimen, I started to realize this ain't working. 12-year-old champion. Because everything just hurt all the time. Most of the muscles I trained were just sore all the time. From training every single day, probably. And when it comes to running, my ankles began to hurt. So I stopped until the pain was gone and started again to train and run every single day. And then I stopped again. It was a vicious circle. Much more a vicious cycle. Not a victorious one. After this whole process repeated a few times, I realized I had to change things. And therefore invented the alternating sports pattern. In short, if I trained strength on day 1, day 2 would be running, and strength again and running again. Here is a calendar inserted with the running circled in the running days, the dates circled in yellow, and the workout dates circled in red, and you just have an alternating pattern. Alternating sport on alternating days, the caption reads. Until the infinity of time, this meant I could also train and run longer. Previously, I ran 2 to 4 kilometers and trained for about 30 minutes. In total, around an hour a day. Not really the infinity of time, but apart from scenarios where I really couldn't train, I kept this cycle for about 6 years. Basically, till age 20, that's when I changed to a schedule where I would align and alter the workout with the days of the week, which prevented and still prevents thinking about whether to do the workout because it's pretty clear, and now also included the variation during the different weekdays. Small hint, most people do different things on different weekdays. This changed my pattern from a cycle that repeated every 40 days or 2 weeks due to a week having an uneven number of days to a cycle of one single week. But back to teenage me. Not that I stagnated too much in terms of sport, but I began to read books about motivation and also goals and began to write them down. Since running and lifting was now a part of my life, I also wrote down goals for these activities. Turns out I needed to compete, at least when it comes to running. There was this local race where you would run 3 kilometers up a hill, 190 meters in height difference. The best ran this route in 15 minutes. I wouldn't, but nevertheless, the preparation began. First, search new running routes. Second, measure them with Google Maps and print them out. Back in the days, phones didn't have GPS. 3, buy a comparably cheap running watch. 4, repeat. Kidding. Step 1. Also, in order to combat the pain when running, I heard alternating the routes would help. Also, I needed to run longer in terms of time and length. Before, 2 to 4 kilometers. Now, 2 to 10 kilometers. Here is a printout, or rather a copy. Even copy-pasted the Google Maps printout onto a sheet of paper. So that's basically one of my running routes. Still is sometimes. Step 2. Somehow I needed to find out how long these routes actually were. The usage of GPS was not in the realm of the possible, since my phone, a Sony Ericsson, didn't have no GPS. It didn't even come with a browser, or at least I couldn't use it, because back in I just remembered that it didn't even have Wi-Fi, because back in the days phones were for calling people, but my bike had a speedometer, and in a long afternoon I cycled all my new running routes with my mountain bike. I already had printouts from Google Maps where I marked my routes. But I didn't really trust the ruler on Google Maps, and it also only measured straight lines. Took quite some time to get some length out of this. Why did I just laugh? Because I just imagined as I am planning these things here that music would appear in the background of me speaking. So here's the picture of the bike. Bike had speedometers already back in the days. Every turn I stopped and noted the distance on my printouts on the corresponding points on the map. Step 3. Buy a running watch with a heart rate strap. Running watches company Polar really got me with their ads about the heart rate being the best predictor of physical health. And I bought right into it. And also the Polar RS100, one of their running watches. So here you can see the Polar RS100. It's a black running watch with a red button, and it can basically only measure the length of a workout and also the heart rate of a workout. Now I was a professional, and I tracked my heart rate, length of the workout, and no end. That's pretty much everything I could track. No GPS, no step count, no interface, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, where you could actually read the data you recorded. No interface, no internet, no Bluetooth, heart rate only with a strap. We had it hard back in the days. In order to now fully dive into the heart rate-based training method, I determined my maximum heart rate, and the watch then determined in which heart rate zone I should train to train optimally. Also, I wrote down all the stats after every single run, since you couldn't really access them afterwards. Ridiculous if you think about it today, after a few days, weeks, months. The first day, finally, of my first ever official race was here, and I failed it miserably. Cause there was this other thing about running, side stitches. They were my best friend for pretty much 10 years of running. They stopped me from speeding too much. But upping by upping the side stitches often to a point where I just couldn't run anymore and walked instead. Here's the picture of me running this first race. And I do have a FC Bayern tricot and I look like 11 probably, at least, even though I was, I think, 14 at this point in time. Not a FC Bayern fan, football club FC Bayern. I had tried combating the side stitches before, with different breathing patterns, running posture, and also not drinking or eating 2 hours before a run. With strength workouts, I used the same method. Not to prevent side stitches, but to prevent water and food jumping up and down in my stomach. My time in my first ever race, the winner had 15 minutes and 8 seconds. My time was 25 minutes and 32 seconds. I was 14 back then already. Actually, just as of writing this, I looked it up, and I'm pretty surprised how fast I was in my first ever race. Not that I was really that fast, rather that I didn't expect this time. In the following years, I would take part in this race a few more times. Here is me at the finishing line of the first race, and these following races weren't exactly successes. The latest one I didn't even finish, cause my side stitches hurt so bad I just quit. The one before I managed to cross the finish line, simply not knowing what to do about the pain in the sides under my chest. Whether it was standing, walking, sitting, it took about 10 to 15 minutes for the side stitches then to finally disappear. Here is basically some other runner, because this is neither me nor the winner of the race, but I wanted more pictures, so I took this stock picture I found on Unsplash. It seemed no matter what I tried, I simply couldn't train properly. Also, my training was limited by the heart rate zone set by my watch at 60 to 80% of my former maximum heart rate, which in retrospect turned out to be not really optimizing for maximum running performance, especially in the long term. Especially this meant that I couldn't ever train with my race pace, since in a race I didn't use the heart rate zones. But instead, I just ran as fast as I could, and that pretty much sums up my running career. Here are a few pictures from my third run at this race. In total, I ran 4 times, with the last one, the one I didn't even finish. Was a little frustrated after that, because here is me, running on a hill again, and here is me shortly before the finishing line, in the second or the third race. Because why could I simply not run properly? This seemingly unsolvable mystery touching different facets of my running would also continue to provide me with some frustrations in the later years. Also later, when I, in my early adult years, would extend to 10 kilometers and even more than 20. Speaking in terms of running distance, the story of my first half marathon is pretty disappointing. I signed up for weeks, my legs hurt at different spots, never trying to pick up running again. I had never run more than 10 kilometers before the half marathon, and here is me trying to look cool. I called this picture the cool before the storm. Me before the marathon, the half marathon. There's actually the song with Morgan Freeman where he also says marathon, and this just sprang into my head. And the race itself, I took my time, lots of time. As you can see, here is the time on my Casio watch in the picture. I only had one goal: reach the finish line after the 21 kilometers. No matter how I reached it, whether it be running, walking, crawling, taking 21 power naps in between, I finally reached it. After a pretty crappy half marathon time of 2 hours and 6 minutes and 58 seconds, considering I was in my prime years of physical activity, this really didn't bother me that much, since I knew going into that race that for 1, I had never run more than 10 kilometers before, 2, the side stitches, and 3, my previous running successes, nevertheless, would have loved to win the race with some grace, before leaving the Earth 25 years later to inhabit Mars, namely leaving for space. The half marathon was the first attempt to up the intensity and especially the length, so in order to prove that finally I had learned something from this experience, I waited until I could walk and run properly again, because I couldn't after the half marathon for 2 weeks, and then I signed up for a marathon in October. The half marathon had been in early spring. I figured till then everything should be fine. Here is a picture of people running a marathon. Not me running a marathon, reads the caption. And I also did the half marathon, right? I thought. Somewhere along these lines, or rather thoughts, there seems to be a miscalculation. But I'm probably still missing the skill of detecting it, so I waited until I could walk again and picked up running after a few crappy training sessions. It was already September, and apart from my glorious half marathon, I didn't even run for more than 10 kilometers. Again, I figured if I wanted to run the 42 kilometers marathon distance, I at least had to attempt more than 10 kilometers once again. The sun went up and I started to run. The first 12 to 13 kilometers, right in the middle. I took this picture to document my glorious achievements. Me in front of a sign in a city. Me taking a selfie in order to honor the middle of my first ever 20 kilometers run, without realizing I would be limping for a few weeks and days. For a few days and weeks. Well, this happened again. Classic case of overtraining, of too much progression in intensity and especially in length. So in order to prove that finally I had learned something from this experience, I waited until I was able to walk again and never went to the marathon. €100 sign-up fee down the drain. Good job. That concludes the chapter of me running races. And never went to the marathon. Or attempting to. Well, I just read the same thing again. So, that concludes the chapter of me running races or attempting to. But with this post, I didn't at least initially intend to write a book about all my failures in sport. Therefore, I have to end this at some point, eventually, without writing a book. But since I did begin also with the stories of picking up climbing and lifting, here are a few more things about these two in order to provide you with some closure. Every well-spoken, that's a quote, and the quote is by every well-spoken boss firing you. Climbing turned out to be quite nice. I never competed, I always felt I wasn't good enough, but this feeling actually had some well-intended roots. I actually wasn't really good enough. I also didn't really grow before I turned 18. The following years gave me an additional 20 centimeters boost in height, quite nice, especially compared to a height of 20 centimeters less. For all the non-metric people, 1 centimeter roughly equals the length of one grizzly bear. So here is a picture of me climbing. The caption reads, pretending to climb in Italy above the sea while simultaneously trying to maximize the look of coolness while simultaneously trying to make it seem hard. I don't really know if I now should insert a picture of me looking as ripped as possible. That's a quote by every guy ever when asked what he would like from the menu after entering the gym for the first time. You already see it on the climbing pictures, so here's another one of me climbing, or rather upsiling. I actually looked up the word and turns out the English language just copy-pasted the German word in this particular case. So here's a picture of me climbing, rather upsiling, and we have another picture, which is Lake Garda in Italy, and we also have another picture, and we also have pictures of ducks. I also could show you my insane calisthenics skills in order to exemplify the insane progression of me lifting and doing bodyweight exercises over the years, also called working out, but I simply don't have any.